Realistic conflict theory, the robber's cave experiment. In the 1950s, a social psychologist, Muzaffar Sharif, and his colleagues selected 11 to 12-year-old boys, divided them into two groups. At first, each group of the boys thought theirs was the only group at the camp facility. Sharif and his colleagues posed as the camp counselors. The boys didn't know they were taking part in an intergroup study of conflict and resolution of conflict. Phase 1 of the study was Ingroup Formation. Each group spent time forming social norms, leadership, and group structure. They were given 5 to 6 days to bond and form their group's identity. One group called themselves the Rattlers, the other group called themselves the Eagles. Each group made a flag to represent their group and spent time bonding with their own in-group through activities like treasure hunts and swimming and hiking. Phase 2 of the study was group conflict. Sharif began to expose the two groups to each other. Once the two groups realized they were having to share resources, time and space in the facilities, they wanted to challenge the other to formal sporting competitions to prove who the more competent group is. Their own, of course. Sharif set up where there would be clear winners and losers. The winning group receives prizes, the losing group gets nothing. This was one of the many ways Sharif and his colleagues inserted conflict over resources. Keep in mind, resources can represent something tangible, in this case, food, prizes, or say independent access to the baseball field. And as non-tangible resources like equality, liberty, and values that form group identities and social norms. Sharif also intentionally created situations where one group clearly gained at the expense of the other. For example, one group was delayed getting to a picnic, and when they arrived, they discovered the other group had eaten their food. This helped drive prejudice and conflict between the groups. It was first only expressed verbally by taunting and name-calling. As competitions continued, each group's prejudice and conflict became physical. The Eagles burned the Rattlers' flag. The next day, the Rattlers ransacked the Eagles' cabin, overturned beds, and stole private property. The groups became so aggressive with each other that some boys got into fistfights, and researchers had to physically separate them. They gave the groups a few days to cool off before beginning the final phase. Phase 3, contact hypothesis or conflict resolution. Sharif and his team brought the boys back together for events that might help them reduce their animosity for one another. He wanted to provide them opportunity for reconciliation. He contrived contact events like coming together for 4th of July and watching a film. He realized these types of contrived contact events alone weren't enough to resolve this level of conflict between the groups. Superordinate goals were introduced. Superordinate goals are goals that get people from opposing sides to come together and work toward a common end result. To introduce superordinate goals for the two groups, Sharif and his team intentionally stopped the camp's water supply, which was located on the hill above the camp. Sharif told the boys it was broken by vandals and they needed help find it and fix it. Both groups collectively found the blockage in the water flow and worked together to learn how to fix it. The Rattlers didn't even object to having the Eagles get ahead of them to be the first to get a drink. Rather, they all celebrated accomplishing a superordinate goal together. Another superordinate goal Sharif's team introduced was the camp's food supply truck was stuck in a low trench. The groups had to come together to use a tug-of-war rope to pull the truck out. Sharif reports that before conflict hypothesis with superordinate goals were engaged in, the two groups came together for meals. They sat in clearly defined separations from the other. After contact hypothesis and superordinate goals were introduced at breakfast and lunch on the last day, the boys' seating was considerably mixed, where no longer clear intergroup and outer group were visible. Here's the kicker. The Robbers Cave experiment we just talked about was the third of 3 similar experiments Sharif conducted with boys at camp around realistic conflict theory and conflict resolution. An earlier study conducted by Sharif and his team produced a very different result. While the researchers were in the process of trying to incite hostilities between the groups, the campers figured out what the researchers were trying to do. Both of the two boys' groups realized they were being manipulated and responded and no longer seeing their groups as the in-group and out-group. But they saw the team of counselors and Sharif as being the out-group, the actual threat and source of conflict. I believe that's part of our answer.